And with that, I think we will go ahead and get started this morning. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for taking the time to attend today's webinar. This is the webinar series for the taking the place of the the TZD conference. And today we're going to be talking about eCharging and phlebotomists for multiple E's. My name is Mike Hansen, and I have the privilege of serving as the director for the Department of Public Safety, Office of Traffic Safety. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everybody this morning. And I have a couple of thank yous that I'd like to shout out. Our great thanks to all of the individuals who helped put together this TZD webinar series. We have session organizers, e-leaders, speakers, moderators, technology experts, and all of the folks behind the scenes. We depend on our partnership with the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota and their organizational and technological expertise. Without all of you doing what you have done, this just would not happen the way that it always manages to come through. I'd also like to thank our three agencies and federal partners that make these webinar series possible. Our partners at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Minnesota Department of Health, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation, all partner to bring these webinars to you. Minnesota TZD is also very fortunate to have great support from the private sector. And I'd like to thank Bolton and Menk, AAA Minnesota Iowa, the Auto Club Group, HDR, Highway Credit Union, and the Minnesota Prevention Alliance for your ongoing and continued support and partnership. Before we get started today, it is my distinct pleasure to recognize this year's TZD Enforcement Star Award. This year's recipient is Sergeant Joshua Moore with the St. Paul Police Department. Sergeant Moore is currently assigned to the Traffic and Pedestrian Safety Unit for the St. Paul Police Department, where he is responsible for supervising and managing the parking enforcement and traffic enforcement officers assigned to that unit. He is the central go-to person to field traffic complaints in the city of St. Paul. He also assists with injury and fatal crash investigations. And these are just a few of his assigned duties. On top of all that, he helps to schedule and manage all of the speed enforcement, distracted driving enforcement, pedestrian safety efforts, seatbelt enforcement, and move over law grant-funded activities. In managing all of these TZD initiatives, Sergeant Moore has managed over 350 officer shifts, resulting in over 3,600 traffic stops just since October of 2020. And remember, this was all accomplished during the COVID pandemic, civil unrest, and during a time when many communities were questioning traffic enforcement as part of their public safety services. Sergeant Moore's leadership and his directions to his officers has helped these officers to have minimal to no complaints from the public and numerous convictions for traffic violations, therefore improving public safety in the city of St. Paul and really across all of Minnesota. Sergeant Moore, I would like to take this opportunity to offer my sincere congratulations and thank you for the outstanding work that you and your partners at the St. Paul Police Department have accomplished. Linda, I believe you have a video that you're going to play from Sergeant Moore. Go right ahead.
Hello, I would like to thank Commander Cat Brown and Senior Commander Jeremy Ellison for nominating me. And to the co-chairs of TZD, thank you for recognizing me as this year's Enforcement Award winner. I am the person that is here accepting this award, but I am one person on a team in Ramsey County that is doing great work. Our county continues to be a leader in the state, and we have a strong core group of people that are helping lead the way. The last year and a half has been very trying for law enforcement. A lot of us have stood shoulder to shoulder on skirmish lines and responding to civil unrest throughout the metro area. I know this has been difficult, and some are asking themselves, why would I make another traffic stop? We are all seeing the effects of less enforcement on our roadways. Speed and aggressive driving are becoming the norm, and our fatalities are skyrocketing. I would ask each of you to remember why you got into law enforcement. I think most of us wanted to be part of something that is bigger than ourselves and to help those that are unable to help themselves. Enforcement alone is not the answer. And every E in attendance here today is part of this team, and it will take all of us to get us towards our goal of 0 deaths on Minnesota roads. Again, thank you for this great honor and recognition. To each of you, stay safe, take care of your families, yourselves, and each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Moore. And again, congratulations for some really great work. We do appreciate that. And now it is my distinct pleasure to turn the presentation over to today's moderator, Scott McConkey. Scott, it's all yours. Go ahead and take it away.
Okay, I'm on here, but I'm having a little trouble on opening my screen. Here we go. Sorry for the delay. As Mike mentioned, my name is Scott McConkey, and I will be the moderator for today's session. And I'd like to thank Mike for his introduction, and also want to thank Sergeant Moore. Outstanding. I'll just make it brief. You have our highest respect. Thank you, Sergeant. And Mike, thanks for turning over. I also refer to Mike as boss, but he's also been a partner. It's been the pleasure to work with Mike since we were both young officers in Otter Tail County. For those of you who are just joining late, I would like to welcome you again to today's webinar. The title is eCharging in Phlebotomist for Multiple E's. Before we turn it over to our speakers, I do have those housekeeping issues to review. There is both a chat box and a Q&A box in your menu. If you have a question for a speaker, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can also ask for technical help through the chat box. So let me just state it again. For technical help, use the chat box, but for questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A box. We will get to our questions at the conclusion of the presentation. If there are questions that need immediate attention, I will work to interject those at an appropriate time. The TZD webinar series is proud to offer continuing education credits. These listed credits are available for this webinar. To find the form, please go to the eCharging and Phlebotomist webpage. For our law enforcement viewers, post-board credits are also available for this webinar. Please read this important statement from the post-board. Whether you are watching this webinar live or recorded, please watch the webinar in its entirety and follow the instructions on the TZD website. The link to this website can be found in the chat box. The University of Minnesota will submit your completed affidavit and attendance report to the post board. Now to our topic today. Again, as stated, eCharging in Phlebotomist for multiple E's. We have 3 speakers today. It will be first Bill Lemons of the Minnesota County Attorney's Office and of the Office of Traffic Safety. Second, we will have Sergeant Tyler Millis of the Minnesota State Patrol. And finally, Mike Oswaldson of the BCA. As I stated, Bill will be our first speaker. Bill joined the Minnesota County Attorneys Association in 2008 and currently serves as the Traffic Safety Resource Prosecutor for the state of Minnesota. In 2007, this was a new program in the state, and Bill is responsible for its creation and development. In this position, he provides training, research, technical assistance, and support to Minnesota prosecutors, law enforcement, and traffic safety partners. And uniquely for us in the Office of Traffic Safety, a resource we could not imagine working without. Bill has extensive jury experience in the area of DWI and is a frequent presenter at continuing legal education and seminars and DWI update webinars. He earned his BA in political science from the University of Northern Iowa and his Juris Doctorate from Drake Law School. He has served as an assistant county attorney for Noble, Scott, and Monoma counties since his admission to the Minnesota Bar in 1999. Bill, you have the platform. I'm taking it Bill is working to get his speaker set up. We have our producers in the background. Susan, do you have a way to open his mic?
I got it.
There we go.
Okay, there, I think I got it now. So welcome to the eCharging and phlebotomy for multiple E's. I'm going to talk about just kind of give a prosecutor's perspective of law enforcement phlebotomy, kind of a little bit of a legal perspective, and then Tyler will get into the more of the details about exactly how the program works. And then we're going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to talk about eCharging and search warrants. So as prosecutors, we really like law enforcement phlebotomists. We've had the program since about 2010, and we've not had any legal problems or legal challenges with using law enforcement phlebotomists in the state. There's a number of advantages to having law enforcement phlebotomists. First of all, as prosecutors, we can potentially eliminate a witness as a chain of custody witness. Many counties are going to, judges are going to require that we bring in the nurse or the technician or the phlebotomist who drew the blood to testify about the blood draw, kind of establish the chain of custody, testify about their qualifications to actually draw blood and how the blood was drawn. If we have a law enforcement witness, that makes it much easier. As prosecutors, we'd much rather have law enforcement witnesses coming in. A lot of times the hospital personnel are reluctant to want to come to court. They'd much rather be doing their medical job at the ER at the hospital than be coming into court to testify. Another advantage that we have with law enforcement phlebotomists is that we can get a blood sample drawn sooner, closer in time to the time of driving. We're going to eliminate the transportation costs because we don't have to take the person to the hospital for the blood draw. Sometimes in some parts of the state, this can be a significant distance to have to drive. We're also going to eliminate delay with obtaining the sample, getting to the ER and having to wait for the phlebotomist to come in and draw the blood. A lot of jurisdictions will also see cost savings. Depending upon the cost of the blood draw, you may find that it's actually cheaper to have your own law enforcement phlebotomist on staff. And then finally, just the issues that we have with CVO cases. And obviously we're going to get a search warrant in DWI CVO cases for the blood draw. But then after we get the search warrant, we have the reluctant non-consensual person that won't cooperate with the blood draw. In a DWI case, we can charge them with refusal. In a criminal vehicular homicide case, we're going to want to get the blood sample. And in those cases, how are you going to do it if the person's going to physically resist the blood draw and the hospital's not going to assist? In some places, the hospital won't assist with those non-consensual blood draws. So the obvious question, just logistically, how is that going to occur? Obviously, much easier, much better with a law enforcement phlebotomist. So when I talk about phlebotomy, just to kind of start at the basics, we're talking about puncturing the skin, puncturing the vein, and drawing a blood sample. It's usually from the arm for the purpose of laboratory testing. But I wanted to do a poll question. Linda, could we do the poll question at this time, asking the attendees today, do you have law enforcement phlebotomists in your agencies, in your jurisdictions? Yes, no, or unknown. So we do have a question. Linda, how do they answer the polling question? There we go. There's the poll question. Do you use law enforcement phlebotomists in your jurisdiction? Okay, then we can see the results here. I just kind of wanted to put the question out there because we do have law enforcement phlebotomists throughout the state. You can see the results here. 23% answering yes, 53% answering no, and 23% answering no. So we do have law enforcement phlebotomists around the state. Tyler can talk more about that, as he's the phlebotomy coordinator with the Minnesota State Patrol. But again, we've been doing it since about shortly after some of the law changes that I'll talk about in 2010, and using them around the state, and have not had any legal problems doing that. So I've talked about the definition of phlebotomy and what it is. One of the interesting things is that there's not a licensing agency or a certification that you get to be a phlebotomist. You can go through the training. A lot of the technical community colleges and so forth will offer training in phlebotomy, but there's not a actual license or certification that you get anywhere, not in the state, not national or anything, but you do have to go through the training to learn how to do it. And then a lot of times they work in the hospitals, and that's part of their job is to draw blood, and it may be part of their job among many other things. The statute is 169A.51 subdivision 7. This is the DWI statute, specifically the implied consent statute, and it'll talk about who can draw blood, and it lists off several, kind of a list of job titles of who can draw blood. And one of the issues that we ran into was these titles didn't necessarily, they weren't necessarily what the hospitals were using. Many times hospitals would have their own titles, and in the Flermoen case cited here was a good example of that. In Flermoen, the hospital, the personnel who drew the blood had the title of technician, and that was not in the statute. He was essentially doing the job of a medical technician, but the hospital didn't call him a medical technician. He was just called a technician, even though he had had the training to do phlebotomy, and that was his job, part of his job at the hospital, and he was qualified to do that. In Flermoen, the defense argued that because he didn't have the job title medical technician, technician isn't in the list of titles here, that he was not qualified to draw blood and his blood test results should be suppressed. The court actually ruled for him in the implied consent case and rescinded the driver's license revocation. They did not suppress the test results in the criminal case. They said that because this is in the implied consent statute, it doesn't govern the admissibility of the test results in the criminal case, but the implied consent case, they did rule for him in that case. And then as a result of the Phlebotomist case, there was a legislative change to the statute in 2010. So then at the end of this list of titles, language was added, some essentially catch-all language was added to include other qualified persons. So people who are trained in a medical facility, go through the phlebotomy training at the technical colleges, are then qualified to draw blood under the statute, regardless of whether the exact title that the hospital gives them is found in the list here in the implied consent statute. So then it was shortly after 2010 that Minnesota started a law enforcement phlebotomy program, training law enforcement officers to draw blood and go through the training. And we've had good success with it. A lot of times law enforcement will work as EMTs or otherwise, and can also go through this training and can do it just as well as the hospital. They can be held to the same standards for training, qualifications, and doing the blood draws as you would have in the hospital. It can be done at the police station in a professional way. So that was the Phlebotomist case. So you really have two arguments. You would have two arguments anyway. That the officer is qualified to draw blood, and then secondly, under Phlebotomist, it wouldn't even affect the admissibility of the test results in the criminal case anyway. A number of other states are actually doing the same thing with law enforcement phlebotomists. There's, I think, a clear national trend toward using law enforcement officers and training them to do these blood draws. Arizona and Idaho, I just listed them here because they've been at it, I think, longer than Minnesota. They've done a lot with these. They early on in the early 2000s, they had NHTSA grants grants from NHTSA to actually start up their programs. But Minnesota was one of the early ones shortly after, since about 2010. And then Illinois recently started doing it. Texas, of course, and Georgia, I know, has a phlebotomy program, but we're seeing more and more states kind of move in this direction because it works well. We're not necessarily talking about changing what we're doing. We're going to get the electronic search warrants and all that. We're not talking about the forced blood draws so much as just when the person's going to do the blood draw, instead of taking them to the hospital and having medical personnel at the hospital do it, we can do it right there at the police station, get the blood draw, eliminate a potential chain of custody witness, eliminate some of those issues. So if you have any questions, if you think of questions after the training today, here's my contact information. I'm happy to help out, answer any questions you have regarding this or other subjects. It looks like we do have a couple of Q&As here. So we have a question. Bill, our paramedics do blood draws for the police department. If we train them in-house, can EMT basics do the blood draws as well? And I guess I'm not sure exactly what the question is. Our paramedics do blood draws for the police department. If we train them in-house, can EMT basics do the blood draws as well? Yeah, I mean, if they're qualified to do the blood draws, if they've had the training to do it, and they're capable of doing that, I would say yes. the thing that I would caution you on is that they absolutely should be held to the same standards, the qualification standards that you would hold any other phlebotomist, because we don't want bad results. We don't want anybody getting injured. That's only going to negatively impact the program. It's going to bring legal challenges. It's going to make judges less look upon law enforcement phlebotomy less favorably. I do know that the judges are certainly aware of it. The Birchfield, I think most of you remember the Birchfield regarding our refusal law, Birchfield and Bernard at the United States Supreme Court. And it actually came up in the oral arguments at that case at the US Supreme Court. One of the justices asked about law enforcement drawing blood. Another question, how much forceful restraint are police allowed to use to obtain blood? We in the emergency medicine are not allowed to perform non-consensual phlebotomy. And that's the issue too, is the hospitals a lot of times aren't going to help you do a non-consensual blood draw. So you're left with law enforcement. How much restraint are they allowed to use? The answer that the lawyers would give is a reasonable amount of force. I think Mike Oswaldson and Tyler can maybe talk about it more, but it's going to depend a lot too on your own department policies. You're going to want to follow your own department policies as well, and you're going to want to know what you're going to do in these situations before the situation arises. And I don't know if Mike and Tyler want to chime in, or if you guys want to address it during your presentations as well.
Yeah, this is Mike. I'd probably cover it later. If we have some time, I'd be happy to expand on that. And I think Tyler will too.
Okay. Thanks, Mike and Tyler. So that's the end of my presentation. Again, here's my contact information. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Scott McConkey to introduce our next presenter.
Okay, and I got the buttons down, so I'm responding much quicker here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Our second speaker today will be Minnesota State Patrol Sergeant Tyler Millis. Sergeant Millis graduated in 2015 from Minnesota State University in Mankato with a bachelor's degree in law enforcement and an associate degree in psychology. He attended the Minnesota State Patrol Academy in 2016. His first assignment was the Fairmont Station, where he served for just over a year. He then transferred to West Metro Dogwatch, yay Dogwatch, and where he spent a year before transferring to the Elk River Station. In 2020, he took a promotion to become a sergeant and is now the coordinator for the state DRE program. I had to throw in that shout out for Dogwatch. I always had a soft spot for the Dogwatch cop. Sergeant, it's all yours.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to get my screen to flip here.
Sergeant Millis, try your display settings.
Let's do that.
You did have it.
There we go.
There you go. There you go.
Let's do that. There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Scott. My name is Tyler Millis. I'm with the Minnesota State Patrol. I have the privilege to serve as the DRE coordinator for the state. I'm just going to quickly touch on some of the training it takes to become a phlebotomist and kind of where we're at with this program. So why should you become a phlebotomist? Number one, the cost of actually going to a clinic or a hospital and getting a draw. So in 2020, Regions Hospital was charging $210 a draw, and then the lowest was in Cook County. The Cook Community Hospital was $22 per draw. To put this into perspective, the Minnesota State Patrol in fiscal year 20 spent just right around $40,000 on blood draws throughout the entire year. Like Bill said before, that chain of custody is also huge. We're keeping everything in-house with law enforcement. Department can keep the case very clean, not only for reporting, but for the prosecution's sake as well. Everything's right in-house. And then again, like Bill said, that court, we don't have to rely on medical staff to show up to court. There's a lot of clinics and hospitals that are reluctant to sell or to give their people time to go to court. And not only that, but they typically don't get paid to go to court for something they did at work. I'm going to let Mike Oswaldson touch on this more, but just so you're aware, when it comes to a search warrant, we always want to get a search warrant for blood and urine. Unless it's a CVO or CVH, then we can do blood only. With that being said, you always want to start by attempting to get blood in most cases. There are some cases you'll want to go for urine. An example of that would be if you know that they're under the influence of K2, then you'll want to go straight to urine. When you are going to draw blood, it's important that you, even though we give that exclaimer that they can refuse the warrant, you want to tell them that you're drawing blood. Don't ask them if they'll provide a sample. Say, hey, we have a warrant for your blood. We're going to draw blood. Please extend your arm. Give them the chance to extend their arm a couple times before you just go right to that refusal. Refusal, where did it come from? Basically, if we back up, we look at, the court looked at risk over reward. So you can't refuse a search warrant per se. The court said that on a 4th degree, 3rd degree, 2nd degree DWI, highest case scenario, we're looking at a gross misdemeanor. If they have a gross misdemeanor refusal, let's provide that option so that we are not getting hurt as law enforcement and we're not hurting the individuals we're trying to draw blood for. So again, risk over reward. Again, I can't stress enough, it's not that people can refuse a search warrant. It's what's the risk over reward? If we're getting that gross misdemeanor charge, either way, what does it matter at that point? When someone can't refuse, CVO, CVH cases, they cannot refuse. Going back to that question that was asked earlier, the courts have said that we can forcibly take blood from a CVO, CVH suspect. We do in the State Patrol, we will forcibly take blood. We will get that blood. And then the evidence, when we get that blood kit sealed and ready to get back, you usually can just toss it right in the mail. And then the mail carriers will get it to the BCA for testing. However, on a CVO, CVH, consider hand delivering it yourself if that's a possibility. And the reason why is sometimes things get lost in the mail. So those higher cases, we want to make sure that that kit is getting, that evidence is getting to the BCA, so we have that for prosecution. Understand that the BCA is extremely busy right now. They're looking at about, I'm sure Mike will touch on this too, but they're looking at about 7 months per blood testing. So just be patient. You're gonna get those warnings in the email saying that your case is stalled. It's okay. Just be patient with them. And then understand that if the blood comes back quote unquote clean, you can request further testing if you have a area that you want them to test further in. So going back to our statute, just reading what Bill showed or put up earlier, I bolded some of these key terms for us. So phlebotomist and other qualified person. So the other qualified person, if you look at that second bullet point there, the statute says, or sorry, not the second one, I'll get into that in a minute, but other qualified person includes law enforcement. It was put there specifically for us. The biggest thing with this statute is what I have underlined there. Law enforcement or anyone that draws blood is in no manner liable in any civil or criminal action except for negligence in drawing the blood. just like everything law enforcement does, we are not going to be charged civilly or criminally unless it's done negligently. So we are protected by statute for drawing this blood. This is the number one question I get when in regards to this phlebotomy program. And it's the main reason why departments are hesitant to start this program. So just understand that you're not liable unless it's done negligently. So going back to that qualified person, right, in statute, it says a qualified person means medical personnel trained in a licensed hospital, or, and where we do it is in an educational institution. And I'll get into that in a second here. So the training, what it involves is an 8-hour online course prior to going to Dakota County Technical College for the hands-on portion of it. It's self-paced. You don't have to do it all at once. You can start and stop as you need to. Again, it's done prior to school. Once that's done, you'll spend 4 days at Dakota County Technical College in Rosemount, where you'll do 30 hours of hands-on practical training. Yes, you will poke other students with needles. You'll have to get poked yourself. It's not a big deal. We have great instructors there that teach you how to properly do it. Once you're done with that hands-on portion, you'll actually get placed into a clinical setting where you will complete 50 successful blood draws on individuals coming into the clinic. You don't wear a uniform or anything like that, so that no one knows that you're a cop or law enforcement related. But like I said, you will go into a clinical setting and get 50 successful blood draws done. So their requirements before you can attend this isn't from the state, this is from the college itself, but you have to have proof of a bunch of vaccinations, and most clinicals require a current flu shot as well. So again, that's just for information purposes. Recertification, you have to do it once a year, go down to DCTC. It takes about 1.5 hours to 2 hours, nothing crazy. And then the instructors are there and you have to demonstrate that you can draw blood successfully 4 times. They do teach you in the arms as well as the hands. If you're a phlebotomist, the requirement for the state is that you have to keep a yearly log that gets turned into me, usually every December or January. Last year, just for a reference, our phlebotomists, we have about 100 of them, and they performed right around 700 blood draws in 2020 as well. So understand also that law enforcement phlebotomists, we're not certified phlebotomists, we're qualified phlebotomists. We are only authorized to do blood draws for law enforcement related activities. So you can't go through this training and then get a side gig drawing blood unless you go through that full training through the clinic or hospital that you want to get a side gig in. Draws must be done in a controlled setting. It doesn't have to be sterile as well. It just has to be clean, and then it has to be done on a stable platform. So what that means is don't do it in the back of a squad car, don't do it on the side of a road. Take them somewhere where there's a table that they can sit down. I do most of mine right at a jail. I just did one last Friday at HCMC. I can go right in there and draw blood. They actually like it because we don't have to tie up one of their phlebotomists to do this for us. I've done it in numerous places, but just have it in the back of your mind that it has to be controlled and stable. And then when it comes down to money, a lot of people, well, most people are concerned about money, but the OTS and the NHTSA provide funding for this program. So all fees are covered, including housing. The only thing that's not covered for officers and other personnel to come is their wage and any per diem that might come into effect. What's not covered is those immunizations as well. So a typical blood kit that I start our phlebotomists out with, after I start them out with them, it's typically their responsibility to upkeep it. But you want to have a couple blood kits in your kits from the BCA, some bandages or Coban, rubber tourniquets, gauze, and some extra needles, butterfly needles, or some preference towards those for some people. personally, I just use the needle that's provided in the kit. Luckily for us, a lot of medical personnel are willing to provide us with some Coban if you want that. That's this picture in the top left there with the colorful stuff, Coban, as well as rubber tourniquets. I just got a few from HCMC. They're willing to throw me some. And that was a real quick crash course on the phlebotomy program. If you have further questions about it or want more information or thinking about starting a program in your agency, please reach out to me. The other thing I wanted to hit on quick is in the state of Minnesota, we want everyone to go through the same training that's law enforcement related. So I ask that you come to me and we get you put in the program through DCTC. That way it makes prosecution's life easier, and we know that we're all on the same level as far as training and got trained at the same place. With that, I'll turn it right back over to Scott.
Sergeant, before we move on, we do have a couple of questions. Maybe we'll address them right now. How do you manage the law enforcement phlebotomists such that they do enough blood draws to maintain their skills?
So that is a great question. It comes down to that yearly recertification. That's why we do it and have 4 draws, so that we know that the law enforcement personnel still know how to do the draws. I understand that, you know, some people will get 50+ draws and some people won't get any in a year, but that's why we go back for that recertification.
Okay. And then there's one more question. Are there any logistic or legal issues with being a phlebotomist on your own arrest?
The short answer to that is no. I have not had any issues. I've done arrests from start to finish, done an eval, a DRE eval, and drawn my own blood before. You might get questions from the arrestee as to why I'm drawing the blood. But no, as long as you explain to them that you're trained, and a lot of times what I'll tell them is we're going to save time because I don't have to bring them to the hospital. But no, I have not had any issues with that.
Okay, that concludes our questions. Thank you, Sergeant. Well, our final speaker will be Mike Oswaldson. Mike is the DWI eCharging Deployment Coordinator at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Oswaldson served as a member of the Minnesota State Patrol for 35 years and retired at the rank of Major in 2012. For the past 9 years, he has worked at the BCA, excuse me, as part of the eCharging team. Over those 45 years, he has been involved in DWI enforcement, education, and legislation. His current role at the BCA is to train and support peace officers that use eCharging to process their DWI arrests and search warrants. Mike's commitment to DWI enforcement has been consistent throughout his entire career. As a major, he continued to work designated DWI enforcement shifts. And excuse me, Mike, if I'm wrong, but I believe you made your last DWI arrest the same week you retired. Finally, I want to thank Mike for his personal impact to my life and career as a former boss, a mentor, a friend, and as the captain that promoted me to lieutenant, a position that has opened many doors for me and that eventually led to the opportunity and honor I now have to serve so many outstanding cops in this state. Mike, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Scott. Yeah, that's true. I love the job. So are you able to see, Scott, can you confirm you can see the PowerPoint slide there?
Not yet, Mike.
I had to get my mic back on. Not yet.
Oh, okay. Let me redo that. You know, we go through all this testing and everything works great. And then the next thing you know, in the live session, it doesn't. How about now?
Yep, you're on, so I'll duck out of here.
Okay, good. Well, greetings to all the attendees. My history's been given, enough on that. I'm not going to go through this list in the interest of time, but these are the topics that we're going to cover. A couple of new things, some reminders, and just some things that need some ramping up in the field. Thanks to all of you for your use of eCharging. This has been an incredibly successful program for the last more than 6 years. Every consecutive month, 99.9% or more of the DWIs come through eCharging, and paper has pretty much dried up. I just submitted a federal fiscal year-end grant report, 23,500 DWIs created in eCharging, and during that 12-month period, only 2 were submitted to DPS by paper. So from the Minneapolis and St. Paul PD size agencies to the agencies that have just a police chief, everybody's using this program. It's really been a success. So thanks for your use. The same is true with the search warrant application. 60,500 search warrant applications since the program was launched, and about 48%, just shy of half of those, are for DWI search warrants. There's a modification that took place that went into effect last Tuesday. Many of you were experiencing a lockup at the point of searching for the driver. So let me just show you the real subtle change there. So when you log into eCharging and you create a new eCharging form, you open up the DWI forms wizard and you enter your driver's name, as you've done for as long as you've used eCharging. You search for that driver, the information comes back, and you click select. What used to be there is an import button. Instead, now the information just goes back into that original screen. You click the next button, and as you can see, all of your information populates into the subject details page. So it's the same number of mouse clicks, but I mention it because some of you may think that something's wrong. It's not. It was to address that lockup problem that we were seeing, frankly, more and more of as time went on. So select and then click next. All your information will be there. As of the first week of July of this year, off-road recreational vehicles can and should be processed through eCharging. There's a very, very subtle difference. Let me just go into a DWI that I've opened. I'm in the test site as an imaginary member of the Eden Prairie Police Department. And so I gotta get rid of this. So there's just a couple of minor things. I grabbed the wrong DWI there. All right. So you've opened a DWI, you've gotten to the peace officer certificate page. At the vehicle details page, you're going to answer the ownership question with yes or no. For an off-road recreational vehicle, ATV, watercraft, snowmobile, you're going to click the button here, the box that says no license plate. And notice that it displays no plate, other for the state, and it does throw in an expiration. A little counterintuitive since there's no plate, but that's a programming issue. So check the box, it enters no plate. And just a friendly reminder, when you have a vehicle that has no plate, you have to look up the vehicle make. Of course, here's the list. Let's say this is a snowmobile, and we'll say it's a 2019 model. But to enter the vehicle make, you just click that small looking glass. We'll enter Arctic, and then we can pick from the, well, helps to spell it right. And then we can select Arctic or whatever model of off-road recreational vehicle you have. And then if we did move forward, you would find that the license plate impoundment function in eCharging is bypassed. There's no plate impoundment on off-road recreational vehicles. So check the box, no plate, everything else is pretty much automatic. And enough on that. I want to touch on this because I still contact officers that have pending DWIs. I'll ask what happened and they'll say, well, I ran up against that 2-hour limit and I didn't have my test, so I threw in the towel and kicked the driver loose with a citation for something. There never has been a 2-hour limit. There is no limit on testing. It's a 2-hour protection. There's a bit of a misunderstanding on that. Tests taken 2 hours beyond, or tests taken beyond 2 hours are still valid. The statute covers both things. Notice that in that clause covering 0.08 and even 04 commercial vehicle, it says you can't be at 0.08 at the time of driving, or, very important, or, as measured within 2 hours of the time of driving. So you want to get that test in the 2 hours from the time of the crash or the driving, because it's protected. There's not the argument of what it may have been at the time of driving. But There's also that part of the statute that says it's a violation to be driving at 0.08. So you may be working on a hit and run and can't locate the driver for 6 or 7 hours after the crash. Get the test. It's still a valid test. It's just that if it's beyond the 2 hours, defense and prosecution experts can argue about what it might have been at the time of driving. Once a breath test is started, and you have to switch gears to go to a fluid test, you don't need to create a new DWI event. So let's say your driver tests lower than their display of impairment, or you go to the station and find that the DMT is for some reason inoperable, or the driver has physical limitations to providing that adequate sample. Apply for a search warrant, blood or urine, try to obtain that fluid test. There's no need to start a new DWI event. All you need to do, leave the breath test advisory intact. On the incident details page, simply change the test type from breath to either blood or urine and proceed. As Sergeant Millis mentioned, search warrants must be for blood or urine. If you use the DWI search warrant, it's going to provide that for you. Both blood and urine are going to be checked. It'll convert those check marks to text that say blood or urine. And that's, of course, because in order for there to be a refusal, the driver has to refuse both blood and urine. And as was mentioned by both speakers, criminal vehicular operation or homicide, blood only, blood only. This is also very important. The statute is real clear about the refusal advisory. It does not need to be given as a word for word verbatim thing, but you do need to inform the driver. And notice what the statute says. At the time a blood or urine test is directed, not asked for, not begged for, at the time a blood or urine test is directed, the driver must be informed that refusal to submit to that blood or urine test is a crime. It's done up front. Kit sample information. There's a paper kit sheet and has been for decades in the blood and the urine kits. Those no longer need to be completed and sent with the sample unless it's a criminal vehicular operation or vehicular homicide case. The information about your kit and sample needs to go to the lab. And let me just demo that real quick to show you how easy that is. We do follow up on several of these each week with the lab. So I guess I'll just start with, I think I can use this existing one here. So we advance with next. Oh, I forgot to put in the bin. And I'm going to cover something about mapping here too, as long as we're on it. So I'm going to enter a case number. And today's date and the time and mapping the location. Now, because I'm in as an Eden Prairie officer, it zooms into the municipality of Eden Prairie. And if I pick an intersection, it will identify the location, Mitchell Road and Chestnut Drive, city and the county. And the important part is latitude and longitude. Very, very important that those are provided. But I want to show one other thing. Some of you are no doubt noticing that you're getting a location back with a milepost number. Even on city streets, even on small city streets, sometimes they're coming back with a milepost because of how the geomap is set up. For example, if I select a location, here's where I think I stopped this driver on the freeway. Notice that it says 494 at milepost 11, or it could be a city street. Notice that you can modify that. Actually, I want it to say at Prairie Center Drive. Okay, so the latitude and longitude are locked in, but you can modify that location. You answer the child endangerment question. You indicate the date and time that you took the blood or the urine sample, the blood kit, number, and the expiration of the kit. And then this is the section that's not getting completed sometimes in time. This needs to be done before the sample reaches the lab. And just consider how many seconds it takes to do this instead of that painful paper sheet. Violations of DWI, the driver's alive, the kit's intact, powder's present, the sample was taken by RN Smith or whoever the phlebotomist was, breath test given, yep, it was a 0.000 on the PBT. And we want a test for drugs, and cocaine is suspected. The lab very much wants your input. If you have any suspicions about drug type or any other comments for the chemist, this is where it gets located. They appreciate that. If a DRE was used, you click yes. What was the DRE's opinion about the drug classification or no? But once those fields are filled out, you click submit to lab. And if I've selected a kit that I haven't used before, I'll get a successful response back. You need to make sure that that happens. So kit successfully submitted to the BCA lab. And if you scroll down into that section, it provides for you right to the second, the date and the time that that sample was submitted. So a couple things there. We do get questions from officers. What about forfeitures on these blood and urine cases? And the answer is eCharging will provide the forfeiture notice and property receipt for you if there's enough circumstances, driver history, to trigger a forfeiture. Not reliant on the lab test result, but at the time of the arrest. So after you submit that information, in fact, let me just go back there for a second. After you submit that information to the lab and click either next or save, you should get an advisory that tells you, there it is, that there's a forfeiture, vehicle forfeiture applicable. Click print preview to print a forfeiture notice and property receipt. I won't do that in the interest of time, but it'll print for you the property receipt, the forfeiture notice, and in the background, by merely printing those documents, the forfeiture coordinator in your department, or you, if there is none designated, are going to get those additional administrative forms sent to you by way of email. A couple of search warrant highlights. I can't stress this enough. When you obtain a search warrant, make sure that you save a paper or an electronic copy for your agency. We get calls about 1 every 2 weeks from an agency that says, we didn't save the search warrant, we didn't file it with the court, and can you find it for us? It's a year ago that the case occurred or the arrest occurred. The answer is we can't. They're gone after 6 months. That was a 60-day retention period. Now it's 6 months, but if it's beyond 6 months, eCharging doesn't have it. So make sure you keep a copy. Just a reminder, your records staff and your prosecutors do not have access to search warrants, only peace officers and judges. Also a friendly reminder that within 10 days of the search warrant being executed, state statute requires that that search warrant and the receipt of any evidence taken should be filed with your local court within 10 days. That's why we thought that 60 days or now 6 months is a sufficient retention period for eCharging. The court is the proper retention place for those search warrants. And I trust that you'll know somebody in your agency that's responsible for filing those with the court's e-filing system. And again, the next statute in line talks about the receipt. The receipt must be given to the person that the evidence, in this case, blood or urine sample, was taken from, and a copy of that receipt needs to be filed with the court along with the search warrant that was executed. A couple of things on criminal vehicular operation and homicide. We've touched on it. Here's a couple more points and then we'll wrap up and take questions. I know this is elementary, but I have come across a couple search warrants just in the last 2 weeks where the officer, with the best of intentions, processed the case as a CVO, even though there was not injury to somebody other than the driver. The injury must be to another person. When you open a DWI event, if you go that route, you're going to get that question. Is this a CVO or homicide incident? If you answer yes, then eCharging is basically going to kind of stop you and say, well, this needs to be handled a little differently. You don't create a DWI event, go immediately to the search warrant and proceed. And if you check in the search warrant that anyone was injured or killed, another person was injured or killed, the programming will create that as a blood-only search warrant. So as discussed about the force, know your agency's policy, but the statute makes it very clear that a test may be taken against the driver's consent in a CVO or CVH case. Go directly to the search warrant as mentioned. You're going to be going for a blood sample, blood. You go right to the search warrant. And why not urine? Why is blood? Well, generally speaking, the lab is able to provide a quantitative value for in a blood test. It does that for blood. It does not have the ability to do that in most urine cases. Now, if it's a routine DWI arrest and you're proving that there's the presence of a Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substance, good enough to have that. But if you're a prosecutor and you've got 3-4 victims that are injured or dead, the prosecutor may very well want to know how much of that substance was found in that person's body. How does that compare to what the prescription dosage should have had in the person's body? How excessive is this amount? And then, at least arguably, it's more difficult to obtain a urine sample if force is needed rather than blood. Why no DWI event? That's because the implied consent law is knowingly sacrificed. Because it's a blood-only search warrant, and because no refusal advisory is given, there's nothing to report to the Department of Public Safety under the implied consent law. So there is no DWI event. All consequences rely on the outcome of the criminal CVO or CV homicide charge or charges. And that's because the statute says if you give the refusal advisory and the person refuses, it says then a test must not be given. So don't back yourself in a corner. Just proceed right to the portion of the law that deals with the authority to take a sample, blood sample with force if necessary. There are a couple of vehicle forfeiture changes coming up. They go into effect on January 1 of 2020. It will reduce the number of DWI forfeitures that you're used to seeing now. The new statute basically provides that if a driver's arrested for a first-degree DWI or arrested for DWI with 2 priors in the past 10 years, either a conviction or refusal, those circumstances will continue to trigger a vehicle forfeiture. But the other parts of the statute, for example, the canceled IPS driver or having aggravating factors count, those are going to be gone. So the good news is you need to be aware of that. But the good news is that the developers in the eCharging group are actively working now so that at 0001 hours on January 1st, the programming should take care of that decision-making for you. This is my contact information. As the other speaker said, any questions, anything I could ever do, if you want training at your department related to eCharging, by all means, give a call. And I think that I'll stand for questions with the rest of the group.
Before we get to questions, I just have something I want to cover real quick. I'd like everyone to take a minute to fill out our evaluation survey. A link to an evaluation can be found in the chat box. It will be mailed to you, or you can use your phone and hover over the QR code to fill out your form on your phone. The TZD leadership does read the results of these surveys and uses this information for future events. So thank you for filling this out. Panel, before we get to the reading, I do have a few more questions here. I'm just going to ask that you open your mic and your cameras and we will proceed. I'll give people just a second here to start that survey.
Scott, if I could use that time that you're providing to just expand on what the sergeant and Bill had covered with the taking of the sample with force. It was already touched on, but I can't emphasize enough that you need to have a plan ahead of time. If you wait till 4 a.m. on the night that you've got 3 dead bodies and an at-fault driver, and the hospital's not willing to take the sample, it's way too late. You've got to know whether your hospital is willing to participate in that. I think it's fair to say in this day and age, it started 30 years ago with Mayo. If it's not for a medical purpose, most hospitals seem to be prohibited from providing the taking of that sample. Just know that up front, and then figure out, what are my options? Do I have a local phlebotomist program that the sergeant talked about? Do I have an off-duty paramedic that I can hire? But there's a lot of different options, but you really need to have that in place before you get to that, oh shoot, we've got that terrible circumstance here.
Mike, you took the questions right out of my mouth. That covered 2, actually. It tied back to the first question we had from Bruce, and then a follow-up question asking that very thing about that relationship with the hospital, medical personnel, and the use of force. Anybody else have anything to add on that question before we move on from that part of it?
And Scott, not to make this the never-ending answer, but just so others know, that topic has been battled in some large conference rooms with the Minnesota Hospital Association, with lawyers from Mayo Clinic, and I mean it's just a no budge. You know, we've said, what if a driver in your medical care, killed a mom, dad, and 3 children? Are you not willing to provide the service of drawing that sample? And whether we agree with that or not, their position is absolutely not. They won't. Now, they won't restrict others from coming in to take that sample. So, I mean, if you're looking for a reason to have a phlebotomist in your department, the likelihood of that kind of crash happening at some point is about as important as it gets.
I'm going to ask real quick, and it might have been answered, but being we brought that up, how do they seek and find where, if there's a available phlebotomist in their area?
The State Patrol dispatch has a list of phlebotomists. That would be a good place to start. Otherwise, anyone that's looking for it, I can certainly provide a list to you for your area as well.
Do they
Also,
have a
Scott,
specific link?
Scott, if I could just add, on the eCharging login page, there's a drop-down list titled Available Documents. There's a list of all the DREs in the state. There's also a list there, and this was provided by the State Patrol, of all the phlebotomists. So that's just another option. You could just download it from there.
So I would just add that we ask everyone to seek that out before you have to know. Good to have on hand. Next question. If a person refuses a blood and urine sample despite the search warrant in a DWI case, do you still give them a copy of the warrant they refuse to abide by?
I would still give them a copy of the warrant. Obviously, you need to give them the warning that refusal to take a test is a crime. Make sure you offer both the blood and urine, or direct both the blood and urine tests, that they refuse both of them. And then we can charge them with refusal.
Scott, another question that comes up related to that, we get this question fairly often. What about the search warrant where the driver refuses? Does it need to be filed with the court? And I always say, I'm not the attorney, but you've executed the search warrant. So it seems to me the statute said when the search warrant is executed, it's just like, in a way, it's like finding no evidence after the search. So I think that those should also be filed, and Bill might have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I agree with Mike on that.
Okay.
Okay, good. Okay, I have about 3 more questions. We might have touched on all of them, but or part of them, but I'm going to just read them as they come in. What is the best way to know if a driver has a felony DWI conviction on their record?
Run a CCH for sure. And then I'm sure Mike will touch on this, but eCharging does an excellent job at picking those up as well. As long as they're in Minnesota, sometimes it gets a hiccup as if they're outside of Minnesota and it happened. That's when you're going to want to read through that CCH and double check.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I show in training a case of just one example of a driver who has a conviction of criminal vehicular operation on their criminal history, but it does not show up on their driving records. So the sergeant's absolutely right. And we've got prosecutors that give really some powerful accounts of why it's so important to run that criminal history, even if the driver's record is clear. There's a number of times that criminal history reveals things that are not on the driving history. And the sergeant talked about the out-of-state DWIs. It's amazing how many times those convictions find their way to the Minnesota criminal history.
Okay, thanks. If there is no DWI event created in a CVO or vehicle homicide investigation, how does the test results get reported to the Department of Public Safety to revoke the driver?
And I hate to keep taking the mic here, but the answer is that it doesn't. The test result is not reportable. Obviously, when that lab report comes back, it's given by the peace officer, their department, to the prosecutor for the criminal charge, but there is no submission to the Department of Public Safety. And that's been the rub for many, many years, that the driver who's responsible for severely injuring or killing somebody else continues to drive on a valid license. And that's why in 2014, the legislature created and put into effect a law that gives peace officers an incredible amount of power. But once the peace officer personally believes that there's probable cause that the at-fault driver is in violation of alcohol or drug-related CVO or homicide, they can report that belief. And in fact, the statute says shall report that belief to the Commissioner of Public Safety. That's done through eCharging. There's a CVO wizard in eCharging, and it makes that about a 4-minute process to report it. Once DPS receives that, they send a letter to the driver saying that on whatever date, it's about a 10-day notice the statute requires they are suspended, and they stay suspended for as long as that criminal process takes. So if you want to shoot me an email, I've got a kind of a roll call training recording on CVOs, and it's covered in there. I'd be happy to share that link with anybody.
Law enforcement can do it for alcohol and drugs. So if it's CVO based upon alcohol and drugs, you can do it for the distracted driving.
Right.
Law enforcement can't, but the prosecutor could charge them with gross negligence. So those gross negligence CVO, CVH cases, then if the complaint gets certified, the charging document gets certified to DVS, then you kind of get the same result for those CVO cases as well.
When I worked the road, I didn't have the benefit of eCharging, but still, it's a good thing to keep in mind for records folks and our supervisors review to make sure that gets reported through the process.
And the interesting thing is the officers that are troopers or deputies investigating that crash may feel that strongly the night of the crash, that they have sufficient belief to trigger that suspension. The prosecutor, for very good reason, might want all tox results back, takes months. Reconstruction report takes months. If it's a vivid case, the peace officer can do that the night of the crash. They just have to hold that probable cause belief, and again, alcohol or drug related only.
Real quick, if I could just touch on one thing I failed to mention during my PowerPoint. Going back to phlebotomy, another selling point for this program is time. There's a particular agency that I am trying to get on board with this program. They're really worried about the liability. I keep talking to them about that, but they're 25 minutes. They're in between two hospitals, 25 minutes each way. So they get someone that's impaired. They have to drive 25 minutes there, 25 minutes back. That's 50 minutes. Well, then you get to the hospital and the ER is busy, and now we're on their time. We're not on our time anymore. All of a sudden we're quickly well past that 2-hour mark, and we're taking, agencies are short across the state. Now we're taking an officer off the road for that long. How much more simple could it get than taking this person to jail where they're going to go anyway and being able to just draw right there? It saves so much time.
Well, for those of us retired or seasoned or cops, man, I wish we had phlebotomists when I was working the road in DWI eCharging. It's just changing the whole landscape of making us more effective. I do have one more question and one more minute. Do I need to give the driver choice of providing blood or urine sample?
For
If it's not CVO, CVH, yes.
That's so that we can charge them with refusal. Yeah.
They have to refuse both,
right?
But you don't give them the choice right up front. The statute
correct.
says the peace officer may choose the type of test. So you can start out by saying, driver, I have a search warrant for your blood. Refusal to provide it is a crime. Give your arm to that nurse. Done. Now, if they give the blood sample, you're golden. But if they refuse, then you got to start all over and say, very well, I have a search warrant for your urine. Refusal to provide that sample is a crime. Here's the urine bottle and my instructions for how you provide the sample to me. So the officer can be strategic to try to get the sample of preference, knowing that they may have to settle for option B.
Well, we just ran out of time. We timed that well. Tyler, Bill, Mike, thank you very much. And I want to thank our viewers for taking the time. It seems that whenever we brush on the topic of DWI, we have a large attendance. And I think that speaks well to Minnesota and their commitment to DWI enforcement and prevention. So I want to thank the panel and all of you out there that where the rubber meets the road for keeping us safe. Thank you and stay safe. Any parting things? I think other than that, I believe we're done.
Thank you all.
So we will conclude. Thank you all and take care.